All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The House is adjourned to 2 p.m. tomorrow. We've now reached the moment of interruption. The subject for this evening's late debate was submitted by the honourable member for Preston. Therefore, be resolved, the Premier has a duty to lead the province in times of natural disaster. The honourable member for Preston.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise this evening and speak on this resolution. As you know, Mr. Speaker, we witnessed a very dramatic storm in the last 48 hours, and with some respects, it's a miracle that more people weren't killed or injured in this very serious storm. If the storm had been a little bit more powerful, even more damage would have been done. But I can tell you, after looking in my area today and other areas of the municipality this morning and yesterday, the devastation couldn't have been much worse. The only thing could have happened would have been more homes damaged and more people injured and possibly more people killed. On Sunday at 6 p.m., a local TV reporter said he ran into people from North Carolina.
Order, who are too much noise in the chamber. The honourable member for Preston has the floor.
Where was amazed that there were little preparations being taken for the storm. Places that they used to hurricanes, they would board up the windows and make mandatory evacuations in low-lying areas. None of this was done. None was requested by the government at any time. People would know where the predetermined shelters were. Indeed, we didn't have any predetermined shelters, and the shelters, in some cases, people had to evacuate those because they weren't properly set up. Instead, we watched the waves and admired the surf because we all had a false sense of security, a sense of security that could have killed a lot of people and injured a lot more. Surely, nothing bad had happened because the province hadn't issued a warning until 5 p.m., a mere 7 hours before the storm started. Although I'd watched this storm develop over the last 2 or 3 days prior to that, and it was clearly indicated that it was going to hit Nova Scotia at some point, although we didn't know where. We know the storms in Nova Scotia are infrequent, especially hurricanes, but not notifying people is not acceptable. Environment Canada issued warnings early on Sunday morning, and yet Emergency Operations Centre was not up until 1 p.m. that day. Not time enough to set up emergency shelters, do the other things that probably should have been done. What was worse, there was no mandatory evacuation in low-lying areas, no call for boarding up windows that I've already alluded to, things that could have prevented a lot of serious damage. We're talking about insurance rates now, and the more damage is done, the more insurance rates are going to go up, and the more difficulty it's going to be for Nova Scotians to live in their homes. By the time the real evacuation order came, the storm was already underway and actually was too late. Mr. Speaker, evacuation during the storm is very dangerous as well. There was no message conveyed by the Premier that everything was under control. Indeed, everything wasn't under control. I can tell you from my own home in the Porters Lake area that the storm was very intense, and at one time I thought my house was going to collapse under the pressure of the wind. Now, the eye of the storm passed, from my understanding, near Lawrencetown, in the Porters Lake area, and when we go down and look at places like Fisherman's Reserve, where most of the buildings are destroyed, a lot of boats destroyed, and they prepared as much as they could for the storm. Indeed, an earlier warning would have been available. It might have saved some of the damage that was there. I talked to some people today with trees that had gone through the roofs of their houses, and one gentleman today I seen had a tree through the roof of his house, and add insult to injury, he had his car collapsed by another tree. And his next door neighbor, the roof went in his house by a large tree. And the magnitude of the damage you really have to see. You have to go see it. You come to Halifax here, you don't really see the damage that's in the rural areas. It's going to be days and days at the rate things are going, and the damage that's been bestowed upon the rural areas. In one place I looked today in the Porters Lake, a power pole was actually totally lifted out of the ground and dropped to the ground again, not snapped off. And other ones were snapped in two. Trees at 2 and 3 feet on the butt were snapped off, just like there were toothpicks. And just by my home, the trees were laid completely flat, 60-foot trees. And it was the worst storm that I can ever remember in my life, and hopefully we never have another one again in Nova Scotia. You know, when you look at the devastation, we were so lucky we only had so few deaths and so few injuries. The fact that we were simply not prepared. Nobody was prepared for this storm. There wasn't enough early warning. There wasn't enough warning by the people that should have been in control of this to say this is a magnitude 2 storm, possibly a magnitude 2 storm that can do the following things. And those warnings really weren't there. If you watch the news very intently and try to pick up this information, it was very, very difficult. And as far as during the storm that night, I can remember we only had one safe place in our home because we were right on the water and direct line of the storm and very short distance from the ocean, and the wind was coming in there at a very, very severe level, that we were listening to the radio, and the only information we got out of all the information that was there, and we listened to several different stations trying to get it, was that the peak of the storm would be over by 3 a.m. That was the only information that they could get from Environment Canada. And Environment Canada indeed had to even evacuate their own building, which was scary as well. It's not a situation where we want to see anybody injured, but when the next day you go out and you see roads blocked with trees, cars buried under trees, it's just totally miraculous that some more people were not killed. We have to be better prepared for a storm like this, and we have to let Nova Scotians know what's coming at them and how it could develop. Now, I know lots of times we get the warnings for these storms in Nova Scotia, and they really fizzle out to just not more than a regular storm. But it does show us that we can have storms like this, and it can really, really devastate the area. Another issue I want to address, too, that hopefully the government this time will be a little bit better than the last flood program we had, the flood relief program, whereas if I recall, it was 2 people got relief from that, and it was seeing some people's homes that were absolutely buried in water, and they were told, so we can't help you, thousands and thousands of dollars worth of damage. And I'm still talking to people today that haven't got any compensation for that had no insurance and didn't have the ability to pay for insurance, particularly people on low and fixed incomes that when they can't, with a choice between paying for their home or buying groceries, insurance comes the last thing on the list. So it's very unfortunate that that happened, and this storm is a lot worse than the flood we had. And I can't imagine if the province delays in putting in place financial assistance for people, what's going to happen. Some people could be, in real financial jeopardy as time goes on. And as of today, we can't find anybody on a volunteer basis to clean up debris in seniors' yards. I've had several calls from people needing water that have no vehicle, no way to get water in their homes. So the list goes on and on and on. And hopefully there's not a lot of, I know when we get a bad snowstorm, a lot of seniors die from the snowstorm because of the anxiety of not being able to do anything. Luckily, the weather's been good the last few days. We have a lot of seniors at home that probably can't get out of the home to get the necessities, food or water, with no power. And in the rural areas, when you have no power, you can't run any water. So therefore, you don't have any water in your system. Your freezer is going to, probably all the food in your freezer is going to destroy. Maybe that's the food that people had saved money up to get them through the winter or whatever the case may be. But it's not good. And really, really want to know what leadership has been shown by the government the last 48 hours. I really want to know that. You see, the storm's coming, everybody's sort of laughing at it, it's not going to be too bad. And I'll ask the question, if the storm had been, people had been advised better, if they would have had their windows boarded up, and things done that they should have had done, stocked up on drinking water and the other things. I'm going to ask the question very simply. Does the Premier so strongly believe in his Sunday's convictions he doesn't work even during disaster? I hope not, because Nova Scotians wanted the answer to that question. They're looking at all the devastation they have in their homes and in their properties. And I think it's time that people really did ask if he's doing his job as a provincial leader. He's indicated leadership is a keynote of his leadership in the government, and I just want to know if that's the case. It doesn't appear to be at this point, and we're going to have to see what they do about the cost of cleaning this up, and there's going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars, probably millions of dollars worth of damage in particular areas, and we really need to get this done. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The honourable member for Eastern Shore.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to stand in my place and speak a few minutes. although it's unfortunate tonight that people of the Eastern Shore are not able to listen to their representative represent them here in this House, because we don't have any power on the Eastern Shore. And I certainly don't want to underestimate this storm. A lot of members are from different parts of Nova Scotia here, and the storm has only touched their riding gently, or in some cases not at all. The people that are representing the Metro, HRM, and outlying areas up and through Toral have certainly seen the anger and the rage of this storm. And I want to tell you, Mr. Speaker, that like most Nova Scotians, I did hear the warning from Environment Canada. Matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, about 2 days I was aware that the storm was coming, and to be quite honest, I didn't take it too seriously, because traditionally in this area I've never experienced a hurricane to this magnitude. So I did go to the grocery store and stocked up, and my friends also went to Sobeys and other stores that are in the local area, the superstore, and stocked up on water, eggs, and bread, and so on. And we lashed our boats down, and we did what most Nova Scotians would do, thinking that it was only a gale coming. But bango, boy, what a storm on the Eastern Shore. Mr. Speaker, I got up early Monday morning after experiencing a storm, and after spending the night awake looking over the community. And you know what I experienced in our community? I experienced the local people putting their resources together, Mr. Speaker, and helping neighbor after neighbor. I noticed our local fire department members going to seniors' homes, accompanied by the RCMP in low-lying areas. I watched the emergency lights on those vehicles across our community. I said, Mr. Speaker, I feel pleased that I am a person who lives on the Eastern Shore, and I know clearly that our emergency people are ready and prepared to help the community. Mr. Speaker, I did not see any type of neglect, and I represent that community very actively. What I did experience today, a senior in our community was without water, but I noticed their neighbor helped that senior out. I noticed another person didn't have bread, and I noticed another neighbor helped that person out, Mr. Speaker. I've experienced something in this storm that I've never experienced before, Mr. Speaker. It was awful, and my feelings go out to the families that have lost loved ones in this storm, and I feel very sad that that's happened. Mr. Speaker, this storm has pulled our community together like I've never experienced before. Experiencing the RCMP, experiencing ground search and rescue, experiencing our paramedics, experiencing the fire departments watching over our communities in the night of the storm, something very different happened the next morning. As I said, I got out of bed about 5 o'clock, and I went out to my truck, and it was still dark, and it was very quiet after the storm. It was unbelievable, Mr. Speaker. It was very warm and very quiet and still dark, okay? So first thing, a truck drove in my yard with a power saw in the back, and a few more boys arrived in my yard, and we, as a community, went and cleared our roads, Mr. Speaker. And I want to tell you, there were trees down over the roads like you wouldn't believe. But the people from East Jador cleared East Jador, the people from Ostia Lake cleared Ostia Lake, the people from Jador, the West Jador cleared. The good old boys gathered together with their power saws and their trucks, right, and went out, people that I've never experienced before contributing to our community in a volunteer way. They went out and they cleared the roads. They went out and piled the brush on the side. And Mr. Speaker, the torrents of rains then started later on. And I watched people helping people helping people. Now, the member from Cape Breton West wants to know what the member from the Eastern Shore did. I took my truck with my power saw and went with the good old boys. And of course, that member knows very much, Mr. Speaker, that member knows the member from the Eastern Shore as well as if he was my own brother. Because I want to tell you, he spends a lot of time concentrating on the member from the Eastern Shore, and I can assure you, it wouldn't have been a couple hours before he would have been informed, my gosh, the MLA from the Eastern Shore is out with his power saw, cutting and working with the community people. That's how I spent my day, Mr. Speaker. I spent my day side by side with my brothers and sisters of our community helping. And to stand here in this house and to think that the people of the Eastern Shore did not pool their resources together, Mr. Speaker, and not help each other is wrong, wrong, wrong. I doubt, Mr. Speaker, that there are people on the Eastern Shore right now that are hungry, that are not being provided for. I know in Oyster Pond tonight, there's a barbecue in Oyster Pond tonight that if anybody's without food tonight, Mr. Speaker, they're able to go to Oyster Pond and have soup and barbecue. These are the people I represent. These are the people that I'm proud of. And I'd like to say, Mr. Speaker, this is the community that I believe that will meet all challenges and will come out ahead. Now, Mr. Speaker, we know the system. We know the system here. The members on that side knows the system very well. And the members here as well. We know that we have a premier. We know we have ministers that are responsible for certain portfolios. And the minister of EMO is now working with the municipality. Our good mayor, Peter Kelly, is on board with the province. They're trying to hey, look after this situation. As the mayor had said, this is not going to be a quick fix. The people of Nova Scotia understand that we've had a storm. The people of Nova Scotia understands, Mr. Speaker, they understand that we have to work together and that it's not going to be tomorrow before all the logs, before all the poles are put back in place. You know, it's funny. Through this storm, Mr. Speaker, something very pleasant has happened, as well as all the sadness that's taken place. I tell you, the people have had a reason to go out and to help each other. Government cannot be expected to fill all the voids in society. I believe, Mr. Speaker, that's what's going wrong with society today when we depend solely on government for ruling. And I want to tell you, my good colleagues across there, they believe in the very basic ways of life, and I'm sure that they would agree. There's nothing better than a community working together. Now, the trees, I don't know how they feel about all the trees that have been blown out. I know that there are going to be people in the communities that will properly harvest these trees, and the trees that have been lost because of this storm will be put to good use. And I'll tell you, you wouldn't believe what it was like to go to a fishing community and to see the big boats, the 45 to 60 footers, washed up on the road, as if someone has picked them up and put them gently on the road. Gently on the road, the bigger fishing boats. Now, there's some sailboats, I want to tell you, Mr. Speaker, that are not placed so gently. They're upside down or whatever. I, too, have experienced trees that have smashed through houses, trees that have smashed their automobiles. And I've also said to say that we've lost a house. The ocean, to a certain degree, came up and engulfed the house and flooded the basements. And yes, there are people, Mr. Speaker, that are in need. There are people in my community and other parts that are in need. But I want to say that this government, in concert with the federal government and working with the municipality, will do in the end as they always have done in history. They've always met the needs of Canadians, Nova Scotians, and the people of our municipalities. It's false. It's false to say, Mr. Speaker, it would be false for me to stand here and say that any level of government in this country would turn a blind eye to what's gone on here in Nova Scotia. Even our federal brothers at times, Mr. Speaker, they seem to get off track. They seem to get off track and go down a path in which we don't agree with, members in this House don't agree with. I can say that tonight. Our federal brothers make mistakes, but I'll tell you, in this time, I'm sure, because our people are in need, that our federal brothers will be there to support this government, this progressive conservative government. Our minister right now is certainly in talks with the regional mayor in that department, and I'm sure relief will come shortly. Mr. Speaker, I want to tell you, as I said earlier, Mr. Speaker, it's a sad thing that happened to our landscape, to our seascape, to our material things, where people have lost money, and a few people have lost their lives, and that's very sad. But through the cloud of the storm, Mr. Speaker, through the cloud of the storm, a bright day has shone upon us, because as Nova Scotians, we know, Mr. Speaker, that we care for our brothers and sisters, and thank you.
Thank you. I recognize the honourable member for Halifax Atlantic.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to speak at this point about some of the situations that have arisen for many of my constituents. I don't have to lean, thank you. Okay. We certainly are all very, very fortunate that the weather following this storm has been as benign as it is, because if we were in the dead of winter, we would be in very deep trouble. I should also say I can't help believing the government is very fortunate that we are a self-reliant people. And as the honourable member opposite has said, many of us have come to the aid of our neighbours, and our neighbours have come to our own aid. I was not able yesterday to get to many parts of my constituency. There were several reasons. There were, as everybody knows, huge trees downed across the road. You were as likely to trip on a power wire as you were on a twig, and I'm afraid there were many sightseers out endangering their lives, and that is something to worry about. I didn't have to go any further than the end of my own street, where a new house being framed had blown flat. It was interesting because certainly there had been great concern about this particular development. At the time, it was being erected high on a bluff where all the trees were cut down. There is no windbreak left, and in this particular case, there is no house left either. Several of the completed houses lost windows, roof, and so on. These are very vulnerable new houses, and I cannot help wondering just how long they will, in fact, stand, but that's for another day. Stand up? All right. Okay. The biggest problem, though, in the aftermath is, of course, the lack of electricity. Many of our self-reliant constituents and neighbours have supplied themselves with electricity. There's a difficulty, though. They've done this by finding generators or by having generators, and certainly the biggest gossip on the street was where there was coffee available. Some of us had thermoses. Others knew that it was possible to drive through the local Robins, which must have had a generator. The next gossip was who had a generator. Lots of people headed down the street with extension cords, I must say, and not all of them could be satisfied. You have to have gasoline to power the thing. That was the next problem. And although there were a few gas stations which had the electricity to pump gas, I understand that many of them weren't able to, even if they had had the electricity, could not have replenished their gasoline supplies because the distribution center was without the electricity to distribute that gas. So we have something of a knot of a problem, which I think really the government should be looking at. The difficulties there. Another place the gasoline was essential and was being rationed was to power those chainsaws. There were, in fact, many willing neighbors and friends out there with their chainsaws, but they would do only the most essential of the trees that were down across the wires. Freezers as well, lots of people losing food, and although we're very fortunate, again, that there are people with generators, people with gasoline, people with sleeping bags to put over their freezers, that is only going to work for a certain length of time. We were told at the beginning that it would be 5 days. It's now Tuesday. You know, the forecast is sort of Thursday night, Friday morning before Nova Scotia Power, which has made horrendous efforts and really done very, very well. And NBTEL and so on are down there with their lift trucks as well. But it will be several days. The worst thing, though, I really do think, is not the houses and the property damage. Mercifully, we lost no lives in our area, but the damage to the property of those whose livelihoods lies along the coast. One of the things that really has distressed me most was when I was able to get to Sambro this morning, was to hear people just snorting, "Oh, the insurance," and they have no hope whatsoever that anything is going to be done for them through that. It's just sort of a tax they pay. They say, well, it's not going to happen. The next thing, of course, was lobster fishermen. The season begins soon, saying, I can't actually repeat what they said in this. I'm pretty sure, I haven't read all of the rules, but I'm fairly sure I can't repeat what they said, but it was, why not quit? Let's just give it up. Quote? There were some worries about that even on CBC Radio. Okay, anyway, that was distressing. That's really disturbing to hear them up saying. It's just been so many things, one after the other. The quota difficulties and so on. And boats are splintered Wharves are splintered. Herring Cove is a long, deep, narrow gut. I don't know if you've ever been there. It's been stripped of its wharves. They've just all been washed straight up the creek. Boats have been thrown over the bridge, and some things I don't know if they'll be rebuilt or not. And I think we really need to pressure the federal government, Fisheries and Oceans, to assist with this, because these livelihoods are really going to be gone. These men are gathering up, mostly men, a few women, are gathering up traps that have been scattered around the shores, flotsam and jetsam, that's huge. And the traps, some can be repaired, others can't. And there's a lot of money tied up in each one, as you may know. Sambro is a lovely potential tourist area, as people are quick to say when the fishery is gone, but that's not really going to sustain people for very long. Tourism is an export industry. We need to take care of the industry we have at home. Beyond that, again, the local spirit, people have been resourceful. The stores were dark but open. People said, a couple of corner stores said that they would serve as community centers. They were just places where people could meet. They got rid of food that wasn't perishable as quickly as possible. And, everybody has barbecued the last of the food in the freezer. So I do hope that the government is going to be able to take the lead in the aftermath, but also to look at some of the tangle of dependencies that have left us in this very tight spot at this point. Thank you very much.
Gentleman member for Timberlea Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to add my thoughts as so eloquently expressed by the member from Halifax Atlantic. I had the opportunity to tour certain parts of my constituency, Mr. Speaker, and let me tell you, there's a sense of frustration out there. I hear the member from Eastern Shore saying all these wonderful things and what the government's role should be, but there are fishermen and people who want to know, is the government there for us now? And the examples that I can use as we look from one coast to the other, these are the communities that responded during that Swiss Air, Mr. Speaker. They were out there in those boats, and they were there to step forward. Well, now those very fishers, those very men and women, they need help in return. This is the time to have the reassurance, to have the commitment that Nova Scotians will be there, but the Nova Scotian government and the federal government will be able to step forward. Because as the member from Halifax Atlantic said, we are getting ready in the communities that we represent for the lobster season, a lucrative, important part of the industrial commitment that we have in these coastal communities. And it's of real significance that these men and women are aware of the fact that they will be able to go to sea, to make a decent living, and to be able to respond appropriately. This is no time for the Minister of Fisheries to say in this House that he hasn't been talking to his federal brother. Well, we'll make him his federal cousin. This is a time for the Minister of Fisheries and the Premier to show leadership. And to the member from Preston, I thank him for bringing forth this resolution. The mistakes have been made in advance, and perhaps all as Nova Scotians, we looked at it and said, it's not going to happen to us. Let's not worry about it. Well, that's past. Let's deal with the future, Mr. Speaker. Let's deal with what we're going to do tomorrow. What I'm going to do tonight. How am I going to respond to Gerald? How am I going to respond to those people who live down at the end of the Blackburn Turn? What am I going to say to them today? What kind of commitment and answer did I receive today during question period? Not what I wanted to hear. What's the process? How do Nova Scotians get this assistance? When will they have this assistance? After all, Mr. Speaker, it's times such as this that the government of any stripe shows leadership. Leadership to respond. And I think it's appropriate that the Premier take the time to go down to Sambro, to reassure those people, to go to Terrence Bay, to reassure those people that there are answers and that the Premier of this province, the Minister of Fisheries in this province, will respond and will step in there with the needed assistance now, not when it comes around in January, not with a plethora of forms, not with all kinds of excuses, but reassurances that we are going to be there for you now. And there are areas all across this province, areas that have been affected areas from the member from Pictou that are brought to our attention. Let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, leadership begins now, and I call upon this government to respond.
Thank you. Time allotted for late debate has expired. The House is adjourned to 2 p.m. tomorrow.